Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we tackle complex ideas and transform them into clear, actionable insights for you. Today, we're diving into something really fundamental, something that shapes, well, almost everything: morality. Now, you might think defining it would be straightforward, right? But can we really pin down something so personal? It feels a bit like trying to catch smoke, doesn't it? Our main source for this deep dive is Russ Shafer Landau's A Concise Introduction to Ethics, and he actually suggests there isn't one single, universally agreed-upon definition. And when I first read that, I admit it felt a bit daunting. But what I found so compelling was his approach, this brilliant roadmap, really. Instead of chasing that one elusive definition, he lays out 4 crucial pathways to truly understand what morality is, and just as importantly, what it isn't. This isn't about memorizing stuff. It's about getting a clear, structured insight, helping you think about right and wrong, equipping you for those tough ethical questions. Okay, let's unpack this.
And that's precisely the mission. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by ethical discussions. They can get tangled fast. But by exploring these pathways, these frameworks, we can hopefully clarify some common confusions, maybe introduce some new ways of thinking, and by the end, provide you with a much more robust understanding of the moral landscape, both in your own life and, well, in the wider world too.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into the first pathway. This journey starts by drawing a really important distinction, one that honestly shifted my perspective. It's the difference between what our author calls conventional morality and something deeper. He explained conventional morality as the system of widely accepted rules and principles within a specific culture or society, the human-made code. Think about it like this. In some societies, maybe Saudi Arabia, conventional morality might strongly discourage women from publicly contradicting men, their husbands, brothers, whatever. Yet, somewhere like Denmark, it's not just allowed, but often expected sometimes, seen as intellectual engagement even, or here in the U.S., right? There's a strong convention about tipping a good waiter. It's just expected. But travel to many parts of Europe or Asia, and that simply isn't the custom. It wouldn't be seen as immoral to skip it. These are all examples of those socially accepted human-made standards. They shape our everyday interactions.
Right. And what's striking here is how quickly the material shows us the critical consequence of this, the fact that it's human-made. Because it's a product of human decisions, agreements, practices, it means it can be, and very often is, mistaken.
Mistaken. How so?
Well, conventional morality can be based on misunderstandings, maybe irrationality, deep biases, or even superstition, things that aren't really grounded. And this vulnerability, this potential for error, leads us directly to the next concept: critical morality.
Okay, so if conventional morality is shaped by culture and human choices, what's the fundamental problem with just relying on that for our ethical compass? What does this critical morality bring that conventional morality lacks?
That's the crux of it, exactly. Critical morality, in stark contrast, refers to moral standards that are independent of popular endorsement. They don't rely on being popular. It's the deeper, maybe more objective standard that we can and should use to critically evaluate whether those conventional norms are truly right or wrong. When we talk about morality in this deep dive, we're really focusing on this critical morality, the kind that doesn't just accept what society says, but rigorously scrutinizes it.
Scrutinizes it?
Yeah. This isn't just some academic idea. It's the lens through which you can challenge any given social norm. It forces you to ask, is this truly right, or just what we've always done? It assumes, fundamentally, that the popularity of a moral view isn't a guarantee of its truth. Just because everyone believes it doesn't make it right.
That's truly a game changer, isn't it? It instantly makes you question so many assumptions we just carry around.
Yeah.
But how do we actually scrutinize these norms? It still feels like we need, a map for this vast ethical landscape.
Well, thankfully, our source material provides exactly that. It explains that moral philosophy isn't just one big amorphous blob. It actually has distinct areas of inquiry, almost like different departments in a university, but for ethical thought. The author lays out 3 core branches that really map the moral landscape for us.
Okay, structure. I like structure. What are they?
Indeed. Understanding these helps immensely. The first is value theory. This area tackles fundamental questions like, what makes a life a good life? What's truly worth pursuing for its own sake? Is happiness the ultimate goal? Or maybe well-being, something else entirely. It's all about what things have inherent value, what's intrinsically good.
Okay, value theory. What's good? Got it. What's next?
Then we move to normative ethics. This is a huge focus for much of the field, actually. It zeroes in on our fundamental moral duties and principles. What makes right actions right? Which character traits count as virtues? Which are vices, and why? Does the end always justify the means? Or are some actions just wrong, period, regardless of the outcome? It's about establishing the principles that guide correct action, how we should behave.
Duties and principles.
Okay.
And the third?
And finally, there's metaethics. This branch takes a step back, a kind of higher-level view. It asks about the very nature of moral claims themselves. Can ethical theories even be objectively true, or is it all just opinion or cultural preference? How do we even gain moral wisdom? Do we always have a good reason to do our moral duty? Is morality objective or subjective? Big questions.
Wow. Okay, that's where it really clicked for me when I read it. Suddenly, this tangled web of ethics starts to untangle. It gives you 3 distinct entry points for almost any moral dilemma. What's the good here? Value theory. What's my duty? Normative ethics. Or what does right even mean in this context? Metathics. It takes something that feels overwhelmingly vast and gives it structure, makes it much more approachable.
Precisely. It helps you categorize the type of question you're even asking. And that's often the first step toward finding a coherent answer, or at least a clearer path forward.
But hang on. Is all this careful categorization just mental gymnastics? What if, at the end of the day, our moral reasoning is simply dressing up our gut feelings, rationalizing what we already believe? It's common skepticism, something I've certainly wondered about myself.
It is a very common question, and a fair one. But our source tackles that skepticism head-on. It presents the idea that we do have plausible ethical assumptions, things the author calls moral starting points. These can serve as reasonable constraints for our moral thinking. They aren't perfect, absolute answers, but they give us a crucial foundation to build on. We're not just spinning our wheels.
Moral starting points.
Yeah, let's get.
Like what? What are some examples?
Well, the material emphasizes that we're not just starting from scratch. There are certain claims that are just intuitively plausible, right? Even if they need interpretation or scrutiny later. For example, neither the law nor tradition is immune from moral criticism. We kind of just know that.
Right.
Actions that were perfectly legal or customary, like, say, historical slavery, can still be deeply morally mistaken. Our intuition screens that.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Another starting point. Justice is a very important moral good. Any theory that just dismisses justice as irrelevant feels deeply suspect, doesn't it? We have a strong sense that fairness matters, that people should get what they deserve. Also, deliberately hurting other people requires justification. The default is don't cause harm. If you are going to cause harm, you need a really, really good reason. And critically important, equals ought to be treated equally. When we see things like racist or sexist policies, our moral compass immediately tells us something has gone fundamentally wrong there. And finally, maybe obviously, self-interest isn't the only ethical consideration. Morality sometimes asks us to put our own interests aside for others, and things like agonizing pain are intrinsically bad and need powerful justification if inflicted.
Those all resonate deeply. They feel, well, foundational. But take the idea that equals ought to be treated equally. Seems so straightforward now. Yet, we know history is just riddled with examples where that clearly wasn't happening. So what makes these starting points powerful if they've been ignored or violated for so long?
That's a perceptive question. Their power isn't that they are always followed, unfortunately. History shows us that. But their power lies in how deeply plausible they are. Any attempt to argue against them, to say justice doesn't matter, or it's okay to hurt people for no reason, feels like it's starting from a place of having to overcome a massive burden of proof. It just feels intuitively wrong. They aren't meant to be the final word or exhaustive, and they certainly aren't beyond criticism or needing careful interpretation, especially when they conflict. But they give us a sensible place to begin our moral thinking, a grounding for our ethical compass. They're the bedrock. Maybe, not the entire building. The real philosophical work happens when these points clash or need refining.
Okay, that clarification helps a lot. So we've talked about different types of morality, the branches of thinking about it, these starting points. But perhaps it's even clearer what morality is when we look at what it isn't. How does it stack up against other sort of codes we live by?
Excellent point. Yeah, understanding morality often comes into sharper focus when you contrast it with other normative systems. A normative system is just basically a set of standards for how we ought to behave, or ideals to aim for. Morality is one such system, but it's crucial to see how it's distinct from others that might seem similar on the surface, but really aren't the same thing.
And this section of the source material is incredibly illuminating for that. It really helps clarify what morality is by showing us what it is not. Let's take the law first. We often kind of equate legality with morality, right? If it's legal, it must be okay. But they're definitely not the same thing. Some immoral acts aren't illegal at all. Think of maybe cheating on a spouse. There's generally no law against it, but most people would agree it's morally wrong.
Exactly. And conversely, some acts are illegal, but arguably not immoral. You can imagine a country where criticizing a dictator is forbidden by law. Speaking out against injustice there would be illegal, but many would consider it a morally courageous act, not an immoral one. So while law and morality often overlap, they are distinct systems. One doesn't automatically equal the other.
Okay, so law isn't morality. What about etiquette? This one often gets confused, I think. Like setting your forks incorrectly at a fancy dinner party is certainly a breach of etiquette, bad manners perhaps, but nobody would reasonably call it immoral, would they?
Not reasonably, no. And what's even more interesting is that sometimes morality actually demands we don't follow etiquette. We might need to violate politeness. For example, if you hear someone tell a racist joke at a social gathering, good etiquette might suggest just staying quiet to avoid awkwardness. But morality might demand you speak up strongly against it, even if it causes social discomfort or makes someone feel awkward. In that case, good etiquette clashes directly with good morality.
That's a powerful example. Okay, what about self-interest? Acting
Yeah.
in our own best interest. Surely that aligns with morality sometimes.
Sometimes, maybe. But our source points out a common sense, if sometimes unhappy, truth. You can often advance your own interests by acting immorally. Think about whistleblowers who expose corporate corruption or government wrongdoing. They often face severe punishment, losing their careers, social ostracism, legal battles. They aren't usually rewarded.
Right. They suffer for doing the right thing.
Exactly. Morality can sometimes require us to sacrifice our own well-being, showing it's not always aligned with what benefits us personally. That tension often defines real moral dilemmas.
And the last comparison.
Morality is also distinct from tradition. This is a big one. Just because a practice has been around for a long time doesn't automatically make it moral. Historically, think about deeply ingrained traditions like slavery or denying women the right to vote. These were upheld for centuries as just the way things are. Yet, critical morality eventually demanded a break with those past practices. Longevity doesn't equate to ethical justification. Tradition can be wrong.
So if we connect all this to the bigger picture, it really shows that morality occupies its own unique and pretty vital space in our lives. It's not just about external rules from law or society. It's not just politeness. It's not just about what benefits us. And it's not just doing what we've always done. It's a distinct system of standards. And it often requires independent thought, justification, and sometimes even challenging those other systems.
Precisely, it stands apart.
Now, for many, many people, a core part of their moral guidance comes directly from religion. So it's absolutely critical that we explore this relationship. And our source material dedicates significant attention to it.
Indeed. It's a central aspect for a lot of people's moral lives. The author introduces what's known in philosophy as the divine command theory, or DCT. This theory basically posits that an act is morally required just because God commands it, and an act is immoral just because God forbids it, full stop. On this view, morality is entirely dependent on God's commands. If God didn't exist, morality itself would just be, well, a sham, a subjective illusion with no real foundation.
So God creates morality by commanding it.
That's the core idea of DCT. However, this idea has faced some pretty significant philosophical challenges over the centuries, famously articulated in Plato's dialogue, the Euthyphro. It presents a dilemma that's ancient but still profoundly relevant today.
The Euthyphro's dilemma, right? That's a classic. How does it challenge the divine command theory in a way that still resonates? Can you break that down?
Sure. The dilemma, put in a modern context, essentially asks this question. Does God command us to do actions because they are morally right, or are actions morally right because God commands them? Now, the divine command theory, to be true to itself, has to affirm the second option. Actions are right because, and only because, God commands them.
Okay.
But this creates two major problems for DCT, as our source material explains quite clearly. The first is what we might call the God may not exist problem. If God is the sole author and source of morality, then atheism logically means morality has no foundation at all. It just disappears. But many people, including many atheists and agnostics, believe in objective moral truths, like genocide is wrong, independently of believing in a divine being. DCT struggles to account for that.
Right, that makes sense. What's the second problem?
The second, and perhaps the more philosophically powerful one for believers, is the arbitrariness problem. If God's commands have no reasons behind them, if they are just arbitrary divine whims, then God would seem, well, capricious, imperfect even. Could a truly perfect God simply declare, out of the blue, that something like torturing infants for fun is good without any underlying reason why it's good? Our moral intuition strongly recoils at that idea.
Yeah, that feels fundamentally wrong.
Exactly. But if God does have reasons for the command, say, God commands us not to torture because torture causes immense suffering and humiliation, and those things are intrinsically bad, then those reasons themselves are what make the action wrong, not the command itself. In that scenario, God isn't the author of morality. God becomes more like an infallible reporter of pre-existing moral truths. The morality stands on its own, independent of the command.
Wow. So God would be like the ultimate moral scientist discovering these universal moral laws rather than the ultimate moral legislator creating them from scratch. That's a really crucial distinction.
It is. It shifts the source of moral authority.
The source also briefly mentions another powerful challenge to DCT, the divine perfection argument. Can you touch on that?
Sure. This argument essentially says that our very concept of a morally perfect God means God could not command horrific acts like rape or gratuitous cruelty or commanding us to be unkind. If such commands were issued, the being issuing them wouldn't fit our understanding of a morally perfect God. Therefore, morality must be based on something more than just divine commands because we judge the commands themselves against a standard of goodness we associate with divine perfection.
So our idea of God's perfection already includes moral goodness, meaning morality isn't just based on whatever God happens to say.
That's the line of argument, yes. And even if we set aside those philosophical hurdles for a moment, let's assume God exists and is an infallible reporter of morality. There are still practical challenges for people seeking divine guidance in their lives. Well, first, how do you choose which source of religious wisdom to follow? There are many different religions with many different texts and traditions, often containing conflicting moral advice. And second, even once you choose a source, say the Bible or the Quran, how do you interpret it? These are ancient texts. The Bible, for instance, doesn't explicitly mention modern issues like, say, artificial intelligence ethics or genetic engineering. And some passages contain advice that seems contradictory or, frankly, deeply troubling to a modern reader, like apparent condoning of slavery or genocide in parts of the Old Testament. This raises a really important practical question. How do you navigate that complexity and ambiguity even with the deepest faith and the best intentions? Which parts are literal, which are metaphorical, which are culturally specific to that time?
That highlights just how much interpretation and critical thought are needed, even within a faith-based framework. It's not always straightforward. It's about seeking justification, understanding the why, not just blind adherence. Okay, this is such a rich discussion. To bring all these abstract ideas into sharper focus, our source uses a fantastic tool, thought experiments. These are imagined cases, little scenarios that help us sharpen our moral reasoning. They bring abstract principles into vivid, sometimes really uncomfortable situations. Let's look at a couple of classics that really get you thinking.
Absolutely. They're designed to poke at your intuitions, really, and force you to examine the underlying principles you might be using without even realizing it. One of the most famous is the trolley problem. You've probably heard of it. Imagine you're standing by a lever next to a set of train tracks. There's a runaway trolley hurtling down the main track towards 5 people who are tied up. They'll definitely be killed if the trolley continues. However, you can pull a lever. If you pull it, the trolley will divert onto a side track. But there's one person tied up on that side track who will be killed instead. The question is, do you pull the lever? Kill 1 to save 5.
Yeah.
And this isn't just academic anymore, right? It's gained renewed relevance with self-driving cars. Engineers might literally have to program vehicles to make similar life or death calculations in accident scenarios.
It's such a visceral scenario. You immediately feel that pull save the 5, but then you think about actively choosing to kill that one person. It's really tough.
Exactly. It forces you to weigh consequences against direct action. Then there's another type, the emergency room dilemmas. First version. You're a doctor. You have 5 doses of a very scarce life-saving drug. 6 patients have just arrived in critical condition. 5 of them need 1 dose each to be fully cured. The 6th patient, however, needs all 5 doses to survive. If they don't get all 5, they'll die. Who gets the drug? The 5 or the 1?
That's tricky, too. Seems like saving 5 lives is better than saving 1.
Okay, now consider a variation, even more stark. You're a brilliant surgeon. You have 5 patients, each needing a different organ transplant. 1 needs a heart, 1 lungs, a couple need kidneys, 1 needs a liver. Without these transplants, they will all die soon. Just then, a perfectly healthy young person walks into the ER for a routine checkup. They happen to be a perfect match for all 5 patients. Do you? Well, do you sacrifice this one healthy person, take their organs to save the 5 who need them?
Whoa. Okay, no. That feels completely different. That feels horrifyingly wrong. But why? In both cases, it's one life versus five.
Exactly. And that's the power of these thought experiments. Those scenarios, the doctor with the drug, the surgeon with the organs, they feel different from the trolley problem, don't they?
Absolutely. The directness of the action, maybe? Yeah. The role of the doctor or surgeon, violating the healthy person's rights. It just feels fundamentally different.
Precisely. What stands out to you, the listener, in these scenarios? Do your answers reveal certain underlying moral principles you hold? Maybe something about intentions versus consequences or rights? Are these cases truly morally different from each other? And if so, why? That's the key question. These aren't just puzzles for philosophers in dusty lecture halls. They're designed to make you think critically about what you believe is right and wrong, and to bring those often unspoken assumptions bubbling up to the surface.
It really forces you to justify your intuitions.
As we've journeyed through these pathways today, it becomes pretty clear that while a single, neat, universally agreed upon definition of morality might remain elusive, we've definitely gained a far more robust and nuanced understanding, hopefully. We've learned to distinguish between conventional and critical morality, which hopefully empowers you to question inherited norms, not just accept them. We've mapped the vast philosophical terrain with value theory, normative ethics, and meta-ethics, giving you tools to categorize and approach ethical questions more systematically. We've identified some plausible starting points for ethical reflection, providing a solid grounding, even if they need refinement.
And we clarified what morality isn't.
Right. We clarified what morality isn't by contrasting it with other normative systems like law, etiquette, self-interest, and tradition, showing where morality holds its own unique and vital space. And finally, we critically examined the complex relationship between morality and religion, exploring the profound challenges posed by things like the divine command theory and Euthyphro's dilemma. The true work of morality, as this material really teaches us, often lies not in finding an easy, prepackaged answer, but in careful thought, rigorous justification, and importantly, the willingness to scrutinize even our most deeply held assumptions.
Absolutely. This deep dive has shown us that understanding morality is less about finding simple definitions and much more about engaging in rigorous, empathetic inquiry. It's really a skill set we need to develop. So, considering how complex and nuanced morality is, here's something to think about. Where do you think the true challenge lies in applying these ideas? Not just in theory, but in your everyday life and when facing the big ethical questions confronting our world today. We hope this exploration gives you a much clearer framework for those reflections and maybe empowers you to be a more thoughtful, more critical participant in that ongoing, vital conversation about what it means to live a good life. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.